Welcome to Making the Grade, the podcast that explores what's driving the decline in graduation rates between funding rounds and what it really takes to scale a venture-backed software startup successfully with realistic options to exit. I'm Tom Glassam, CEO at Scalewise, and each week I'm going to be joined by founders, investors, and some of the best go-to-market leaders in the world to unpack the strategies, the missteps, and the mindset shifts that separate those who graduate from those who don't. Expect real talk, actionable go-to-market insights, and honest stories that will help you scale more wisely and thrive in an increasingly competitive market. Because there is a smarter way to scale, and we're here to uncover it. Today's guest is someone I've been lucky to know and learn from for well over a decade. Pete Crosby has helped more founders and revenue leaders navigate the journey from 1 to 10 million than almost anyone I know. Pete brings a rare combination of pattern recognition, commercial rigor, and deeply human leadership. And in this episode, we dig into why so many companies stall in the 1 to 10 phase, what real focus looks like, and why team alignment is often the silent killer of an otherwise great business. Pete's insights will be exactly what you wish you'd known from day one, so make sure you have a notepad ready as you listen to this episode. Welcome to Making the Grade, Pete. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. By the way, it's a pleasure to be on with someone that is actually a proper friend of mine. So be nice to me.
Awesome. I will definitely be nice to you. Let's just start with, I suppose, that 1 to 10 journey that I talked about. I know you've led through that journey many times, but I also know that you've coached probably more founders through that journey than almost anyone in our world as well, through the work you do at Revelesco. And over the years, I know that when we've compared notes, you've always had a really grounded, kind of pattern-driven view of what actually goes wrong on that journey. So based on everything that you've seen, what do you feel are the most common mistakes that founders make, or even revenue leaders make, on that journey from 1 to 10 million?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many, but the biggest one is trying to do too much, and it's just so tempting because if you read some of the books, they'll tell you we need to experiment right with your product market fit. You might need this kind of customer or that kind of customer, that kind of customer. So you give yourself excuses for why you're going to deviate from the thing that you're doing. Now, there's nothing wrong with some deviation. Nothing wrong with some experimentation, but what is wrong, I'll give you a quick example. I worked with one organization, really, really smart founding team, really clever, really great product, good purpose-driven business. But like all of those things contributed to one of the problems, which is they were trying to do about 5 different things. And they're really big things. I'll explain. One was, we're going to move up to enterprise. Another was, we're getting all this great data. We should do something with that data. Perhaps we could build a marketplace. They were trying to internationalize. So they were moving into the States, into new territories. 5 different things, all of them, which should require the entire senior group. But instead, one person was doing this, one person was doing the other. There were lots of interdependencies, which caused problems. It's just a major challenge. When you explain it like that, everybody nods along and says yes. And then you discover that they're doing the same thing too. But there's this insidious consequence that happens as a result. And it's that the leadership group stop being a leadership group and end up being heads of projects or departments. And so you'll have somebody off here launching into America, and someone's off here doing the product around enterprise, and someone's off here doing that. And they all come back together and report together at the leadership group, but really they don't have any shared objectives. They sometimes think they do because they might have a shared revenue goal, but as we know, revenue is an output. So it's not a goal in itself. It's just a measure of whether you're achieving your goals. So, I mean, there are many, but I would say trying to do too much, being defocused, pulled in many directions. And that becomes like the grandparents of all the other problems. Like, I've got no time and our objectives aren't clear and what the hell do I need to hire and all those kind of things. But I know what you think, Tom, but I would say that's probably the root cause of so many problems.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, and as you say, there is so many knock-on consequences of that lack of focus or just trying to do too many things at once. But of course, in those early phases, those kind of, when you're coming out of product market fit, you're moving into go-to-market fit, you are still to a degree trying to figure out what those growth levers are and like where do we double down? What do we stop doing? Like, what your advice do you give to founders that are kind of like still want to experiment, still perhaps haven't nailed their go-to-market fit? Like, how should they be thinking about those experiments, and at what point do they have to just double down and focus? Because there's a fine balance there, right, in those early years. So you give us a sense as to kind of your advice to those founders that maybe haven't quite found that growth lever, that very clear driver of growth for them. What would you say to them?
There's three things to consider. The first is that in the very early stage, when you probably think you know what your customer is, but maybe you don't, especially that pre-1 mil bit, the bit before the question you asked, of course, it's completely fine to ask lots and lots of questions and do that experimenting. But you have to go into it knowing that you're creating debt for yourself every single time. Unless your objective is just to run a lifestyle business, which for most of us, we want to really build something, then you don't want to create debt. And so I'll give you an example. I have a company that I work with. They're really early stage. They've just raised. They've raised so they have decent VC money from high quality VCs, and they're good VCs as well. But now I'd like you to do the numbers that you put in the pack that we invested in. Thanks very much. But part of the money they used was to hire a CRO, and the CRO is like, gosh, we've got about 5 different ICPs. In fact, like we discussed the fact that that word "I" is often misinterpreted. It means ideal. It doesn't. You can't have 5 of them. You've got 1 of them. So, what on earth am I going to do with all this stuff? And so we figured out a plan, which was each of these needs to be treated as a cohort, and then we're going to analyze which ones look like they're getting the best lifetime value, which ones are costing the most to acquire, which ones have the best kind of future. And so what you can move into with that kind of analysis is a model, which just asks you to score from 1 to 5 on a whole host of different measures. What's the potential of this ICP? What's the overhead for our sales team for this ICP? For example, if you and I decided suddenly we're going to go for major government organizations with our sales team that used to sell into startups, there's going to be this huge overhead. Either we're going to have to change them all, or we're going to have to train them all. It's going to be hard. So that's probably a low score. So you score all those things and you can plot those on a chart. Now, you don't necessarily have to go for the one with a high score, but at least you go into that and make your mind up with a lot of clarity. So that's the first bit. It's finding that very early on, you want to be making good choices. Now, the answer to the comeback on that is probably, oh, yeah, but we don't quite know. And like, we're still trying to figure it out and we're not quite sure. And like, that is okay. But I would recommend that you go into any of those experiments doing the last 2 things I'm going to talk about. First of those is to have a proper phased plan for any ICP. The unforgivable bit is, I signed up Tom and I signed up this guy over here and this guy over here and that guy over here. Now, like, ooh, it seems like Tom might be the right kind of ICP. Instead, it's going to deliberately and be like, I'm going to go and look for people a bit like Tom. I'm going to look for people a bit like Pete. Now, I do have several cohorts, so I'm going to analyze them, but I've done it very deliberately. I don't have lots of mad kind of outliers. So that's the next thing to do. Final thing I would look at is the measures of what you believe measure success properly. The final bit here is to measure what you believe product market fit looks like. For example, is it usage? Is it activity? Is it provable ROI? Is it opportunity for expansion? Like, what are the things that you actually care about for the future? Now, you may not know which of the cohorts that you're attacking are going to deliver that, but you can measure those very quickly. And the faster you double down on the ones where you believe you're a product market fit, the better. Probably one other thing to say here outside of that list of 3, which is most startups and scale-ups that we end up working with at Revelesco, they haven't done that, at least not in a really systematic way. And so the difficult bit then is to choose, and we're always pragmatic. If you have a cohort you no longer want to work with that makes up a large portion of your ARR, you're not just going to switch that off. It's not practical. So how do you move toward one or maybe more, depending on the size, cohorts which are very, very focused around a tight product market fit? And I mean, that takes quite a lot of work. We spend a lot of time doing that, but that is a very normal discovery. So if you are a CEO founder listening to this and you haven't done the 3 things I spoke about, it's okay. You're in very good company. There's a lot of people doing that, but the longer you leave it, the more of a pest it becomes.
Completely agree. And I love the way you're thinking about ICP backed by kind of data, but also, as you say, aspiration. What are you looking for these companies to do? Is it a land and expand motion? Is it, what are the key kind of criteria for saying, yes, this is a really good fit for us? But obviously you get to the point on that 1 to 10 journey where you do need new routes to market. You do need new go-to-market motions. You do need new segments. How do you think about sequencing things like international expansion or, moving up to the enterprise? And when does the timing actually feel right? And how should companies be thinking about, making sure they're not jumping ahead of themselves, but also waiting too long?
I would always consider everything I'm doing inside 3 overarching principles, and those are predictability, scalability, and repeatability. And you can easily remember that because it kind of adds up to say prescript. And like you're looking for everything that you do, which part of that journey are you in? Now, for most of us in the 1 to 10 mil journey, probably in predictability. And in that phase, what you're looking for is signs that you can say, next quarter, we have a pretty good idea what's actually going to happen. Not just to revenue, but to clients, for example. Once you've got to a point where you can say predictability, then you're at the moment where you might choose to go into scalability. And scalability is when you might decide to move to the States. You might decide to open up in Europe. You might decide to introduce a new product to your existing market. You might decide to go to a second ICP cohort. You might decide to do anything that involves expanding the TAM that you're able to attack. We go and work with a company and they're like, oh, we've been in the States now for like 2 or 3 years. And we're, we've got someone in Silicon Valley or someone in New York. And actually we've got an office in Germany, by the way, because we've got a couple of customers there. And we're thinking of putting a salesperson in Australia. Not always that wacky, but sometimes that happens. But you often find that you're kind of present in the States for a while, but they haven't got the traction. They haven't got predictability in that new market. And this system that I developed a long time ago and have refined ever since is perfect for internationalization. It's actually perfect for anything new that you're going to do, full stop. But I happened to develop it initially for going to the States, which I did in 2005, and I did it again a couple of times since. So there's lots of things to learn by doing that. Phase 1 costs you very little other than time. Phase 1 is we've made a choice. We know how and when we're going to go to market. We've built a detailed tactical plan. So this is the stuff that you might not be showing to your leadership team or your board, but it's the day-to-day go-to-market stuff that's really flipping important. Each one of those things needs a result. Now, naturally, these are harder to measure early on because you don't really have much to go by. But what you do have is an experienced board and experienced leadership team to say yes or no. And this is really important because even here in phase 1, you have got the entire senior group saying, yeah, that's the plan. We know it might be wrong. We know it might need changing. We know that you're going to come back and things are going to be weird. There's going to be odd risks, but we are all behind it. That allows you to pass through a gateway. And the gateways, you can change all of these things. These are just examples, but in this case, all objectives must be achieved. Now, this takes you into a really classic sort of mid-market set of objectives you can see here. So, number 1, we've proven we can deliver demand, built a validated pipeline for the forthcoming quarter, and we've demonstrated some success. And all of those can be measured. We've got some consistency across the 3 months in delivering MQLs or SQLs, whatever we want to put in that. We've got a validated pipeline, which is higher than which is sufficient to deliver a number. And then we've signed a number of customers. In this particular case, I suggest that you might want to pass through 2 of the objectives to get through the gateway. For example, if you and I were to review our sales leaders' work and say, well, they've closed 5 deals and we've got demand coming in. The pipeline isn't as high as we'd like it to be, but we've definitely found a route to market here. We probably wouldn't just circle forever. We'd probably fix and mend as we went. But you might choose the safest option, of course, is all 3. Personally, I think if you ask yourself, if I'd signed 5 customers and I'd figured out how to get steady demand, would I stop? The answer is probably no, in which case now you know how to build your gateway. Then you move into a phase 3. So phase 3 is often where it all goes wrong, because the first two aren't hugely rocket sciencey, I don't think, although I have found lots of bad examples. But here is where you're like, right, let's hire people. I know you've seen this millions of times with companies that you work with. There's the mistake that is made is we've raised money, let's throw it at salespeople, let's throw it at SDRs, let's go and hire a general manager, like whatever the hell it is you do, nearly always fails. So what do you need to do? Well, I would stick with my launch team at this point, the team that delivered phase 2. You may hire someone, of course, but generally speaking, you're starting with, can we deliver revenue generation? Can we do it consistently? Do we have product market fit and good adoption? So in this particular example, our NPS is equivalent to the one that we've got in our home market. And have we started to fill the local market teams? Now, obviously, they won't have done anything yet, but are we filling them and are we pushing them through their probationary period? That means the launch team can start to scale down. Now, at this point, if you're in the launch team, you will be either the CEO or one of the other C-level people, probably in go-to-market. So for me, that's either the chief customer officer, chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, or chief product officer, or a VP in that role if you don't have a C-level. Then you'll probably have someone on the ground and someone customer focused. You'll definitely have someone in product involved in that launch team. You can start to scale down that involvement, but crucially, they are still involved and that team is not going off and doing other things. That's all they care about. Moving to phase 4. And now we're saying we're in growth mode. So we've got quarter-on-quarter revenue growth, or we've got a significant number of customers. We are demonstrating that we have local customer happiness. I mean, how many times do you go to a new market and discover that it's very different to your home market? Is your product suitable? Do you sell it in the right way? And finally, the local leadership team are meeting that first batch of independent OKRs or whatever it is that you use to run your goals. It's only at that point that you pass through a gateway that says the launch team can wind it down. They can go on and do whatever the hell it is. We've finally got this established. So every team that I've seen do something like that, even though problems occur, problems get dealt with quickly, money doesn't get wasted, everybody's attention gets put on the stuff that isn't going well, and that usually is fixable stuff. And everyone I haven't seen do that ends up going round and round in circles for a while. So I'm interested in your view on that. So I'm sure you've done it differently, but that's how I do it.
I love that, Pete. I love the 4-phased approach and the gating criteria to move through them as well. And it makes complete sense to me. But what I love most actually is the fact that you talked about gaining predictability before thinking about scalability. And it's that predictability piece that I think people misunderstand or underestimate, or sometimes feel they've got it before they have, or just sometimes don't understand that there's still a lot more of their current market and ICP and segment that they can be going after. They just get kind of drawn by the shiny light in the US or that new enterprise segment that they could go after. And I suppose that predictability piece, what do you define that as? Like, at what point can you say, hand on heart, yes, we are truly predictable and we should now move into scalability?
You and I and others like us do everything we can to make this as scientific as possible, and we're right to do that. And you can look at all the numbers you like. We all know that I suppose the best reference point is like a sports team. At Revelesco, we've just hired a new performance specialist, John Pitts, who was Roger Federer's coach, and he was on the Red Bull F1 team. He's done a couple of Olympic cycles. Like, I was talking to him about this thing. Like, why is it that if you're a great tennis player, why is it that you then like lose even a game or a set or a point or a match or the final? And the answer is, well, we can sort of figure it out, but we can't prevent it from happening. And it's exactly the same here. You can do everything you can scientifically to deliver predictability and believe that you've got it. And sometimes you're wrong. But the key is to look at all of your signals, all of your flags all the time, so you're figuring it out. But the short answer is, can you deliver demand? So, I mean, there's so much to unpack even in that. Are you generating demand, or are you just capturing the demand that already exists? Are you able to turn that demand into pipeline? That in itself is like a huge thing to unpack as a whole buyer journey thing going on there. Like, how does this market buy? And then once people do buy from you, that's often where the founder kind of exits. Not because they don't care about customer experience, they do, but they've got so many things to do that's less of a priority than like generating new business. And think about how many software experiences you've had where you've got excited about it and you buy it because it's exciting and you like new stuff, and then it doesn't live up to expectations. So you stop using it, and then you realize you stop using it, and you're quite pragmatic, so you stop spending money and off you go, and they never see you again. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, what are you doing about deployment? Like, it's literally the most important phase of the buyer journey. Somebody signs up with Scalewise because they've heard all these wonderful testimonials. They've met you, they met Gav, they want to work with you. And then, like, for the next month, it's just a mess and no one contacts them. They are never, ever going to talk to you ever again. And so it's like that first date moment. So there's all of these bits happening. So coming back to your question on how do you know you've got predictability? You're looking in all of these places to see that things happen in a way that you're expecting. But what we know for sure is it will go wrong somewhere, and you just need to have your finger on the pulse to correct those things. Now, a good leader is always looking for the risks and the issues, the stuff that is bubbling away that you don't notice. They're unpacking things with their team, or sometimes inadvertently hide things from you. So it's very hard to say. But my answer would be, if you've got 3 to 6 months where you are able to say, I know what's going to happen next month, I know what's going to happen next quarter, I know how my customers are going to behave, I know who's going to leave, and I know who's going to stay. I'm able to forecast. I can go and confidently say to my board, this is going to happen, and I'm mostly right. Then you are probably in a predictable place. And I would start to investigate scalability, but always looking back over my shoulder because I might be wrong.
Love it. That's great, Pete. And a lot of what we talked about so far feels to me it's about focus, and it's about timing and sequencing of the right actions or the right projects. But are there any kind of, I suppose, underestimated parts of going from 1 to 10 million that founders just don't realize are going to be painful or existential until they're right in the thick of it?
The biggest one, which I've always known, and I know that you and I have many differences, but one of our similarities is we've always cared deeply about building team and bringing people with us, and genuinely caring about human beings is probably why we like each other. Despite me being like that, the biggest discovery I've had running Revelesco and working with like hundreds of startups and scale ups on this stuff is there's this like rock under the water, and it exists between these two two locations, I suppose you might say, that the boat is going between. And over here on the left, you've got strategy. Over here on the right, you've got execution. Now, I love strategy. It's great fun. Like, I like talking about, like, working. I love those projects, but it's completely useless if you don't go and deliver something at the end of it. Equally, lots of entrepreneurs and founders think strategy is stupid because it's talking and they just want to get on and execute. So that's kind of messy. So they do lots of execution, but without strategy, it's useless. So once you've got into people's head, there's these two things. It's building your plan, and then it's executed on that plan. Like, what else could go wrong? And it's the bit in the middle, the rock under the surface, which is the alignment of the team. I don't think I've ever interviewed a CEO who said, my team are woefully misaligned. Everyone thinks different things. No one's on the same page. Like, meetings are, nobody talks like that, because it's probably not true most of the time. And they don't tend to notice it when it's subtle. So when we want to run a triage, I will interview everyone that I can get my hands on. And what we're looking for is the gaps. Because even if you have a subtle gap between what Pete is saying and what Tom is saying, and the example I tend to give people is, if you and I would start walking in Los Angeles with a 1 degree of separation, we'd end up on the East Coast 90 miles apart. So even though for the first, I don't know, mile or so, we'd probably be able to chat to each other, eventually we're a long way apart. You don't notice that separation happening. And so CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs, because it's harder to put your finger on where the value is with getting your team aligned, I don't like spending money on it because money is precious, but it's the silent killer of everything in your business. And so the answer to that stuff is to work on personal performance, is to work on my maturity in my role. Like, how do I get from a 3 out of 10 maturity to a 4 out of 10 maturity? Like, how do I go up the scale so that I can still be here leading this in 18 months? What are the top level objectives, and how does my team deliver against those things? Not rocket science again, but in my experience, not done by many organizations, and many of the ones that are, they're probably still doing it now in December when they should have done it like last May or June.
Oh, Pete, I love the fact that you called out alignment and leadership in this challenging part of the scale up, messy journey. But I wonder how those leaders really should succeed? Because it sounds like what you're saying is, make sure that people are thinking about the high level business goals, make sure they're not thinking about siloed MQLs or hitting the number that quarter. But are there any like underrated or overlooked skills specifically in go-to-market leaders who generally succeed on that 1 to 10 million journey outside of like, not being siloed and thinking about high level goals for the company? But are there, what are those underrated or overlooked skills in those go-to-market leaders who will succeed?
Well, what's really interesting is during lockdown, I interviewed a bit more than 50 CROs, and all those interviews are sitting, they're notated, but they haven't seen the light of day yet. But they were all with some pretty influential people. We interviewed AWS, Shopify, like big organizations. And almost exclusively, when you ask them what they wanted to talk about, they love revenue, they love sales, they love numbers, they love metrics, they live their life doing that stuff. But if you ask them what they want to talk about, it's people, it's team building, it's how do I create psychological safety, it's how do I hire people and let them do their best work. That's what those people care about. When you dive down further to like the 1 to 10 mil journey, of course you still find some great people, but naturally they're more likely to be inexperienced. They may well like people. They might even be quite a nice person. They might be quite a good manager. They might even be a reasonable leader, but they tend to not be focusing on the team so much. They're much more focused on all of their problems, which they believe to be around the numbers. My view is that the numbers are always an output of something. Focusing on numbers is not helpful. I worked with a company yesterday who said their North Star was to get to 1 million USD of ARR by a particular date. Like, that's not a North Star. Like, that's a measure of whether you're on the right journey, but like no one can affect that. It's just, it's not even remotely motivating. Instead, what we need is individuals who understand what gets you to those North Stars. And overwhelmingly, it's having a team that like want to be on that journey. And so the best leaders, even at a very early stage, are trying to figure out like, how do I release people to do their best possible work? So I think that there's probably many other things on the list, but that would definitely be at the top for me.
Mm. Super interesting because it there is a certain type of leader, I think, certainly go-to-market leader that is really good at that 1 to 10 million journey, but perhaps struggles beyond it. But the classic mistake that I see get made within the Scalewise client base is people hiring a leader that maybe is great at the 20 million or 30 million journey, and they get sucked into the CV and the brand names that are on that CV, when actually what they really need is a builder on that 1 to 10. Do you see that much? And what do you think makes a true builder in that 1 to 10 million phase? Like, what should founders, CEOs be looking out for? Maybe some of the intangibles that aren't on that CV that they should be drawing out in an interview process.
Yeah, it's kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? I think the first place is not to discuss the individuals; it's to discuss the team that you're building. If you think about, I don't know, choosing a life partner. I know you and Karen have been married for a long time. She's not, I hope she's not listening to this. She's not the only beautiful woman in the world. She's not the only intelligent woman in the world. She's not the only great mother in the world. She's not the only like person that like you love to socialize with in the world, but she's perfect for you. And that's because there's this mix of your like skills, attributes, qualities, like all those things that's locked together, create this wonderful like, art that means that it just works. Teams are a bit like that. You think about a sports team, you don't want everyone to be the striker or everyone to be the goalkeeper. You want people to have positions. So what often happens is we get seduced by individuals, but they're not able to slot into that team. And so I would break things down into skills, attributes, and qualities. Like skills are easy to look at because like it's like, are you able to build a forecast? Do you know how to run a pipeline meeting? Like stuff like that is easy to figure out. Attributes are slightly more intangible. They're like what kind of leader is this person? Like what's their experience at leading the group? Qualities, though, it's do they care about psychological safety? By the way, I talk about this a lot, but you don't have to care about psychological safety. You just have to decide whether you do or not. It's possible to build an organization that's threatening to work for and still succeed, but it's a deliberate choice to make. So are we picking someone who can do those things? And how do all these skills interlock so that I've got this array of skills? Now, if you take your leadership group and you score everybody, we'd find that maybe Tom indexes really highly in one area and Pete indexes really highly in another area. Not because one is better than the other, but we're just different human beings. What you're looking for, though, if I was looking for a quality in someone that I wanted to hire, I might be looking for them to be a skilled CTO, but I'm also looking for someone that can boost my leadership team so that they're much better at doing this thing that we're slightly weak at across the organization. So that's the way I would think about hiring and building that team.
I love the way you're thinking about those different dimensions, and of course, as you say, psychological safety. You and I both agree that that is a critical part of creating a high performance culture. But it's not going to be everyone's top three thing to create. How do you think about culture more broadly in a sales organization, and what makes a high performance culture? Because I think you're someone that I've looked up to, and I've always believed that you create not only that psychological safety, but I think a place where people want to do their best work and people want to really strive, and there's an aligned kind of mission and sense of why behind what they're doing. So what else makes up a high performance culture in your perspective?
Well, I think there's three headlines. You could probably write a book, couldn't you, about all of the stuff that goes underneath them. But the first is picking the right people, because the fact is that, I mean, I know I gave the marriage analogy earlier, but there are lots of wonderful people in the world. So how do you go and choose? How do you figure out whether that person really is wonderful? So asking the right questions about culture and values is critical. And to do that, you've got to understand what your own culture is. Like, what are our, I tend to speak more about operating principles than values. For me, a value is something like honesty. Like, I know you and I both care very much about this value, but it doesn't really guide you to how to behave. An operating principle guides your behavior. So, for example, you might believe that I tell the truth no matter what. That might be your operating principle. I might say, well, I also believe in honesty, but I'm not sure about that because that can sometimes destroy people's confidence. I don't believe in lying, but sometimes I might withhold some of the truth. So we've got different operating principles there. So I'd define those, and I'd work really hard with my leadership group, because that means when you go to hire someone, you can hire someone who contributes to that kind of culture, who has a shared operating principle. You have to be very careful not to end up doing a cookie cutter thing. Like, if you go and hire 10 people that are a bit like you, it would be a disaster. So how do you go and bring those kind of people together? But that's the first bit, hiring great people. Then the second bit you got to do, in my opinion, is give people a reason to want to come to work. And like, some of us are building something very purpose driven, but some of us are building things in, I don't know, like crypto and real estate. And we might be able to easily talk about why they mean something, but it's not quite as purpose driven as a charity or being a doctor. So like, why are we here? And what are we trying to accomplish? And building something genuine, I think, is really, really crucial here. The second bit is giving them a reason to want to do things, just find meaning and purpose in their professional life. And the third bit is working with them to help them improve, because any of us, whatever age or experience we are, we stay still, we become stagnant, we become boring, we become old fashioned. It's the reason you see less older people in our industry, because once you lose the capacity to learn and develop, then like you lose, because like things are always developing all of the time. So how can you help those people on that journey? My technique has always been to be really honest. Like, if you want some like practical on here, even in job interviews, I'd say to people, you might be with me for the rest of my life, but probably we'll work together for 2 years at most. So in those 2 years, we need to have a parallel journey where the company gets something significant from you working here, but you end up being able to do something better as a result. And whether that is personal and you pay off your mortgage, or you get to travel, or you get to have a nicer house, whatever you want, or whether it's professional and you get promoted, or you go to another job and get a salary you wouldn't have got without having worked for me, whatever, I'd like to facilitate that. It's that kind of quid pro quo, I think you might call it. So finding the way to take people on a journey. And once you've identified with them, with using that level of honesty, what they actually want, well, then you can help them. So it's three things. It's selecting people, giving them a reason to want to be a part of something, and then coaching, developing, helping, like whatever your own skill set. We're not all coaches. Helping them to develop in the right direction.
Well, I think there's so much to unpack in that, Pete. And but I'd love to dig into something that you said earlier about the hiring piece, because you talked about not hiring 10 people that maybe look the same as you. And I think this is where I'd love to take the conversation, because I know that attracting diversity into teams is a really important part of your leadership philosophy. And I know you've done a lot of work in trying to make go-to-market leadership more inclusive and really encouraging, that diversity. How do you approach that challenge? Because it's a big challenge in go-to-market roles in particular. But how do you go about attracting more diverse candidates into the companies that you're supporting or where you've been a leader in before?
The starting point is to be very intentional if it's something that you care about. It's bizarre how Trump has changed the fashion and allowed people to avert to what they were actually doing. We can now see who was paying lip service to this stuff and who really meant it. I really mean it. And so I'm intentional about wanting to have a diverse workforce, but that doesn't mean that you can be successful quickly. So I'll give you an example. We just hired a RevOps specialist. She's Canadian, Nigerian. Her name's Kioma. She's a black woman. She is the best I met, and I met a lot of RevOps. I mean, we all know loads of RevOps people. There's lots of them out there. I'm sure they're all wonderful, but I wanted like genuine eliteness. She's genuinely elite and happens to be a black woman. I deliberately wanted to have more representation of color in my organization, but I'm not going to accept someone that's no good. And if people that are great don't want to be hired because of their color, whatever, like diverse characteristics they may have, want to be hired because they're great. So I absolutely focused on hiring great people, but I am actively looking in pools where I'm going to find people that mean that we've got more diversity. I'm very deliberate about the pools of talent that I look in order to hire. It's probably why we've ended up with, of the, 9, 10, 11, 12 of us, there's 10 women and 2 men. But I think now there is a responsibility on people like you and I to make sure that we curate organizations that have diverse representation. It's not just color, of course, it's disability. It's even more challenging for people now in LGBTQ plus world, like all of those areas. I want to be very deliberate and conscious about who I bring into my pipeline. When it comes to interviewing people for a role, then your diverse characteristics make no difference at all, other than we will try to shape the process to suit you if necessary. I'll give you an example. I did a panel during lockdown on diverse characteristics, and one of the women on there was Britain's leading academic on dyslexia. And she had failed to get onto the government's dyslexia task force because she couldn't fill the paperwork in the time frame. So she obviously should have been on that task force. She needed a different facilitation to allow her to do that, but she still needed to live or die based on her quality. So the practical answer is going out and finding pools of talent that allow you to then choose from a diverse pool of talent, but still choose the best. The other thing that I would say is this is often a long burn. Having had a black female assistant for, I don't know, 7, 8 years or something now, she and I talk a lot about topics like this, and she will tell you that you want to go and work in a place where you're going to be welcome, and you're going to want to go and work in a place where people seem to be a bit like you. And I remember a place that I worked where the chief people officer at an exec meeting, this is terrible, said, I've noticed that the young black women tend to sit together at lunch, and I wonder if we can change that because it's not very integrated. Like, how can you say this? Of course why wouldn't they do that? Like, these are people that probably maybe have a similar background to them, like the same things as them. They probably feel a bit safer to sit and have why shouldn't they do that? Why aren't you commenting on the white people that sit and talk to other white people? But as over time, people outside see that you hire in that way, and that the people that exist in that world seem to have a good experience, then obviously they're more likely to join you. So then your pipeline fills up and gets bigger. So, I mean, there's a million things we could talk about here, but those are my first reactions to your question.
But it sounds like a key part of this is being deliberate about it, right? You're not gonna magically solve the problem by doing what you've always done. And what I'm hearing in what you're saying is you've got to tap into those pools. You've got to be deliberate about how you're thinking about assessments and making sure that you're casting the net as wide as you possibly can. Because as you say, once you've got some people of different diversities, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientation in your business, hopefully that then encourages others to come in. But unless you're deliberate about getting those early few people in first, it's going to be hard, I think. Pete, this has been absolutely brilliant. You've shared exactly the kind of grounded, experience-backed insight that I think founders desperately need, but rarely get unless they're speaking to you and the team at Revelesco, of course. But beyond your operating wisdom, what I've always admired most is just the human behind the experience. You've consistently championed diversity, fairness, representation in go-to-market long before it became fashionable. Not because it was expected, but because it was simply the right thing to do. And I think that integrity shows up in everything that you touch. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate your openness, your support over the years, your friendship, of course. Genuinely grateful for the time that we've spent together over the years and today, of course. And I know our listeners will be too as well. So thank you so much, Pete.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure. And I wish we could talk for longer because it feels like we've just brushed the surface.
Yeah, we absolutely could. Thank you so much for listening to Making the Grade. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions following this episode, or you'd like to recommend a guest perhaps for our next season, please let us know at podcast@scalewise.com. And if you did enjoy today's episode, please do consider leaving us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'd really appreciate that. As this is a brand new show, reviews really help us spread the word and reach new listeners. Plus, we'd also love to hear what you're enjoying about our show. Thank you so much for your support, and see you soon for another episode of Making the Grade.